Welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss conclusions I've drawn from studying American history and conclusions you might not agree with, but I certainly hope that you will. This encourages you to study American history. And I'm talking about special topics, African American history, and continuing in part two, a couple of people that are interesting to me anyway. And that's why I want to bring them to you so that you know about them. So, some interesting um, black people of the early colonial era in America. Like one of them was Elizabeth Key Grinstead, who was born in 1630 and only lived 35 years. An online source notes Elizabeth Key's father was a white Virginia tobacco planter. Her mother was one of his indentured servants. When Key was claimed as a slave later in her adult life, rather than freed as an indentured servant who had served her contract, she brought one of the earliest lawsuits, a freedom suit, to win her freedom in court. In 1656, Key won her case mainly because her father was a freeman and because she had been baptized in the Christian faith as a child. Key then married William Grinstead, sometimes noted as Grinstead or Greenstead. However, by the late 1660s, the Virginia colony passed laws that required a child's slave status to be determined by the status of the child's mother. That sure let a lot of slave owners off the hook who wanted to have sex with their slave girls. And that being baptized in the Christian faith could not free a person from enslavement. These laws institutionalized slavery in the Virginia colony, one result of which was to have enslaved labor for Virginia's tobacco plantations. There was also an Elizabeth Freeman, born in 1742 and dying in 1829. Elizabeth Freeman was born into slavery as Mum Bet. Bet lived in Western Massachusetts and believed that she had a strong legal case for freedom after ratification of the state constitution of Massachusetts in 1780. She enlisted legal help and brought a lawsuit against her owner in a Massachusetts court. After hearing, the jury decided that Bet should indeed be free. Upon winning her freedom, Bet changed her name to Elizabeth Freeman. Her freedom suit, quote unquote, paved the way for others, which ultimately led to the abolishment of slavery in Massachusetts in 1783. Once the first colony legalized slavery, Massachusetts became one of the first states to abolish it as a result of Freeman's efforts. One should remember also the tragedy of the talented Phyllis Wheatley, 1753 to 1784. Taken from her home in West Africa when she was a young girl, Wheatley was not considered strong enough to work in the island or southern colonies. She ended up enslaved in Boston, where she worked at domestic tasks but also learned to read and write. Wheatley's poem was likely first poem was likely published in 1767 when she was just 13 or 14 years old. She continued to write poetry, and her book, Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, was published in 1773. Wheatley's book became the first book of poems published by an African American only the second book of poems ever published in America by a woman. After Wheatley gained her freedom, she struggled economically, especially as the Revolutionary War raged and an economic depression followed. Although Wheatley continued to write and publish her poems, she could only find work as a scrub woman or a charwoman and died in poverty. Agrippa Hill brings us to the Revolutionary War, 1759 to 1848, his birth and death. Signing on as an 18-year-old in the fight for American independence, the freeborn Hull became one of the over 5,000 men of color to serve in the Continental Army for the war's duration. Hill survived the brutal winter in Valley Forge and fought many key battles, including Saratoga and the Siege of Charleston, while mainly serving under the Polish general Tadeusz Kosciuszko. After the war, Hull became a major landowner and prominent citizen in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. I got that information from a website called smplanet.com, teaching colonial America people, African Americans, so from the internet. And uh, and also now we're going to get into the Revolutionary War and War of 1812, the Civil War, things like that. And I did some study, looked at Harvard website and some of the books I had, kind of put things together. So we'll talk about that more later. And I thank you for listening. And it doesn't matter that you disagree with me; that's fine. Um, really, as long as you have an opinion about American history, that's good. All right. Thank you.